much do you know about Korea? How about their literature? Hi everyone, I am Vivian Florando, taking a Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English, and in this video, we will be learning about the Korean literature. I know we Filipinos, most of us do love Koreans and their dramas. It's because of how good-looking, beautiful, and talented their actors and actresses. It's like a butterfly being attracted to a flower. That is why in this video, it is very fit for us to learn more and deepen our understanding about Koreans and their literature. Now, Korean literature is a body of literature produced by Koreans, mostly in Korean language and sometimes in classical Chinese. Their literature is influenced by shamanism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and lastly, Christianity. Shamanism is related to ancient communal worship rites offered to gods of heaven that seeks to resolve human problems through meeting of humans and the spirit mediated by the shaman. Buddhism is a philosophy and a religion brought to Korea about 1,800 years ago. Its principles of teaching is deeply rooted into the way of life among of the Koreans regardless of their religion. During Joseon Dynasty, they promoted Confucian philosophies as national philosophy. They adopted Confucianism as the ruling ideology. On the other hand, Taoism was introduced to Korea from China during the Three Kingdoms. This is the greatest popularity during the Goryeo period, and it remains minor but significant to Korean thought and integrates with animism. Lastly is the Catholicism. It was imported into Korea by a Korean scholar named Je Sung-hoon. He was baptized while visiting China. They were Protestant missionaries who came during the Japanese rule during the early 20th century. So let us now move on to early Korean literature. So in this literature, it was heavily influenced by Buddhism, shamanism, and Confucianism, and they also began with oral tradition that depicts the love of nature and that man is part of the nature, and here also the good is being rewarded and bad is being punished. Now, in traditional Korean literature, it was during the Joseon Dynasty, while the government and the scholars used the official written language, which is the classical Chinese. It also laid the invention of Hangul, the indigenous script, by King Sejong. So Hangul is the Korean alphabet, and it is the only alphabet in the whole world that was invented by one person, and it is purely phonetic with 10 vowels and 14 consonants. On the other hand, modern Korean literature during the Japanese colonial period developed out of its contact with Western culture, following the rule of modernization. The first Korean writing was produced during the Shilla Kingdom in the 8th century, and the writers here grappled with the issue of colonialism and produced many works that promoted the spirit of national independence. Lastly is the contemporary Korean literature from 1945 until the present. The euphoria of Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule at the end of the World War II was short-lived, and national division soon followed. Also, a succession of dictators eventually gave its way to democracy, and the country emerged as a global economic powerhouse. So next is we have the poetry of Korean literature. So they have 4 major traditional poetic forms. The first is Yanga, or they called as the native songs. It is the oldest poetic form where poems are transcribed from the Yanggal system. So the second is the Pyulgok or special songs, and they called it as well as Changa or the long poem. Third is we have the Siju or the current melodies. So it was the longest, enduring, and most popular form of Korean poetry. The fourth and the last one is we have Kasa or the verses. It was developed at the same time with the Siju, and in its formative stage, Kasa borrowed the form of the Chinese Tu or lyrical poetry and the Fu, which means rhyme prose. Next is the prose. Korean prose literature, it can be divided into narratives, fiction, and literary miscellany. And last but not the least is their oral literature. So these include the texts that were orally transmitted from generation to generation. In conclusion, the development of Korean literature is quite unique due to the creation of complete new language and writing system that was invented by King Sejong in 1946, which is the Hangul or the Korean alphabet, which gives the opportunity for the Korean commoners to have the access to their culture and learn how to read and write. That ends about Korean literature. I hope that you have learned something about this video. Thank you so much for watching.